Lovely. Right. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Becky, the CEO of the English Association, and I'm really pleased to be hosting this session today. The EA is a learned society and subject association, which was founded in 1906 to promote, support, and defend the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education, from primary and early years through to secondary and further education to higher education and beyond. And we cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature, and creative writing. Events like this one tonight are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you so much to our speakers for this evening. And also our members make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. If you'd like to contribute to our national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. At the moment, it costs just £17 to join us for the rest of the calendar year. From January, it'll cost just around £50 to support our events and campaigning work. And you'll get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. I'll pop the link in the chat to our website so you can have a browse. That's enough from me. So it's my pleasure to now hand over to tonight's speakers for our discussion about helicopter stories. Thank you.
So hello everybody, I'm Kirsty and I'm chair of the Primary and Early Years Education Committee, and I'm going to be kind of chairing this alongside my colleague Sonia, who's also here, and so we're going to take it in turns to ask our panelists some questions. So we're really grateful for you, as Becky says, for giving up your time and coming along. Thank you so much to everybody, the people who are coming to speak and the people who are coming to listen and hopefully ask some questions as well. So as you know, today's event we're focusing on helicopter stories, with the idea of kind of how they support children's literacy development, their language development, and the idea of community really across the early years age phase. And I guess some of you out there will be possibly will have some experience of helicopter stories, or a lot of experience of helicopter stories, or maybe none, and you're just kind of looking and thinking about the approach. So they tend to be known as helicopter stories in the UK, and it's an approach to storytelling and story acting. Typically, I think for children aged 2 to 7, I think is the kind of the broad age phase, and based on the work of Vivian Gussin-Paley. And so her work in the US was known as storytelling and story acting. And then it was Tricia Lee, who's with us today, I'm really pleased to say, who then kind of championed it, I think, really brought the approach over to the UK, or kind of developed it in the UK, certainly. And so the idea of the helicopter stories, or storytelling and story acting approach, is that it works with young children's love of telling stories, and then building their spoken language. Obviously, both being storytellers, that feeds into their early writing skills, and it has a lot of personal and social and emotional benefits as well for them. One of the most amazing things I think about the approach is that it needs so very little in terms of resources. I mean, how is that possible? So, some paper, a pen, masking tape, and some enthusiastic children, really, and adults who are happy to scribe and to run the system. So that's quite amazing, I think, for the power it has, for the kind of level of investment in that way. So we're very lucky to be joined by some practitioners who are very experienced to share their thoughts with us today. So here today to talk to us are Gail Alder. So Gail is an early years consultant, and she currently works for North Somerset Council. And the reason we're here really is because Gail wrote a fantastic article for English 4 to 11, which is the EA and UKLA's English magazine. And she talked in the article about the impact the approach has had in the settings that she's been working with. So we're going to come to Gail in a little bit. We also have Alison Stead and I think Catherine Twine from Bognor Regis Nursery School. And they are also going to share their thoughts and experiences on helicopter stories, which is fantastic. I know they've been using the approach for some time in their setting. And I think they are involved in training as well, which is brilliant. So lovely to see you. Thank you, Alison and Catherine. And finally, we have Tricia Lee, which we're excited about. So it was Tricia that pioneered helicopter stories in the UK. And she has been working with helicopter stories, I think, for over 20 years. Yeah, absolutely. And so she now does a lot of training with it, I think, and has used it herself. And she's written a number of articles and publications on this approach. So you may have come across her name through that. So Thank you so much for those people who've given up their time to come along and talk to us. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to hand over to Sonia, I think, who's going to talk to some of our panelists.
Right. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk to Gail about the article that she wrote, Helicopter Stories, which has been amply mentioned by Kirsty already. Although saying that, it's very new to me, because as a serving teacher, I'm bombarded with all sorts of different schemes that come around, and it's nice to be able to find other ideas that may be better than the ones that you've actually been using. So, but we have to, as far as the committee is concerned, we have to thank you for writing that article, because we all enjoyed it. And I think we can honestly say that it's encouraged a lot of interest. So Gail, I was wondering if you could give us a brief outline of Helicopter Stories and basically how it works out in practice.
I certainly will, although I will say at this juncture that, as you say, we're lucky enough to have Tricia here. Tricia is the consummate professional in this and the expert. Although I come from a teaching background and very much embraced Helicopter Stories as part of my working practice, I wouldn't be able to talk as authentically about it in practice as Tricia would, although I wrote it because Tricia supported me with that. Certainly my role is now about inspiring other people to do the training, because it's about people who are doing it with children on a daily basis. So I've certainly sort of run over some of the stages from the article, but I'd really like to talk about the sort of strategy of how we've adopted this in our county, and about the importance of this as an approach, because I was talking earlier on to Kirsty as part of preparation for this, and we were saying it just seems now that Helicopter Stories, storytelling and story acting has been around for a while, but it now seems particularly important. Yet again, we know there are those spirals of learning, and it just feels that this is the time for Helicopter Stories to rise again for a number of reasons. So as you have mentioned, it's in its essence a very simple approach, which it involves marking out a stage on the floor, and then inviting children to sit around that stage, sharing stories with them. And they instantly engage. I've watched Trish do a training on a number of occasions when she's just arrived with a group of unknown children, and they instantly engage with her because she's talking their language. We know through all the work of Vivian Guess-Paley that children engage instantly with stories from the age of sort of 2 above. That it's their language, it's how they learn, it's how they engage. And alongside also somebody like Vygotsky, who always said that children in their play are a head taller than themselves somehow. Children seem to grow through this approach. So children sit around the stage, a story is told, and then children are invited to tell their own stories, which they always do. I've watched Trish train on a number of occasions, and also have now, of course, seen this in practice. And it's an approach that, because it resonates so deeply with children, it's instantly successful. You then gather children's stories from children, write down their words, so the teacher acts as the scribe, writes down the words in front of the children slowly, and gives a sort of basis that they can make the story as short as they like, but no longer than a certain size page. So there's certain management skills that go in around that, and then the children are invited onto the stage to act out the story. The storyteller always gets to choose their own role within the story, but then there's a real sort of equity in the approach where children are just invited around the stage to come up and be the other players in the story. So a very simple approach, and yet very profound in its impact. And I am also today going to be really promoting Trish's work and Isla's work with Make Believe Arts, because it's, for us in North Somerset, it's the depth of the approach, it's the depth of learning. Although it's simple, if you engage with the online learning that's now offered through Helicopter Stories, we've seen a depth and a longevity to this approach really maintaining in North Somerset. Whereas beforehand, as you've already said, Sonia, initiatives come and go. But actually we really feel this is so important, that the more people can invest at the beginning at becoming really excellent practitioners, excellent educators in understanding the approach, then the more impactful it is, and the more it becomes just part of your teaching on a daily basis. We have a number of teachers now that just don't seem to see their educational life without helicopter stories being a part of that, which is where we want to get to with all of our educators across North Somerset.
Why did you initially become interested in helicopter stories? What sparked your interest?
Thank you. So it was about it was the writing of Vivienne Guston Paley, and again, you know, if we do anything from this kind of meeting, it's, you know, it's about inspiring people to continue their educational research. And if people that are on this meeting don't know an awful lot about Vivienne Guston Paley, although she wrote from 1979 through, so I'm not sure when her last publication, Boys and Girls, was, I think 2013, Trish. She wrote 13 books in that time, but every single one of them resonates with current thinking around the learning of young children. I was thinking again in preparation for this meeting about the themes that we're dealing with on a daily basis in North Somerset. I work in early years, but I work with lots of colleagues in schools as well. And we're dealing with lots of trauma-informed practice. We're dealing with, certainly in early years, more and more 2-year-olds coming into our settings. We're dealing with multiculturalism. We're dealing with English as an additional language. We're dealing with kindness and empathy, with democracy, and all of those things, anti-racism. If you look in Vivienne's books, it's all in there. So her thinking, it's still very current because it was very deep, and because it was really centred in child development in its truest sense. The things that she was picking up on, those big ideas. She often talked about the 4 F's in her work: fear, fantasy, friendship and fairness. And actually, the more you look at those, the more a lot of our practice revolves around those 4 deep themes that are so important to children. And of course, if we connect with children, then the learning part is easy, because children, we know, have a veritable thirst for knowledge. And actually our jobs of teachers is unlocking that and working alongside the children. And Helicopter Stories really does offer that wonderful approach. So, you know, if anybody wants to read any of Vivienne's books, never be put off by, you know, if they look slightly old-fashioned on their covers. The stuff inside is the stuff of becoming a human being, and it still absolutely resonates today. So as a teacher, when I started to read them, they weren't based in research in the sort of way that we were collecting quantitative impact data, which obviously we're often required to do now, but it was that qualitative work that she did, just living her life with children in the classroom, reporting on that, and then the immense progress that those children were making as a result of that. So there isn't any tension between this child development, mentally friendly way of being with young children and them making excellent progress. All of the feedback that we've had and assessments, etc., has been that the children absolutely blossom and grow in all sorts of areas of language and literacy, but also personal, social, emotional development as well, and a myriad of other ways. So it was her writing really that just resonated with me, made me feel like it was something I could incorporate in my own classroom. And then when I came out of the classroom and moved more into children's centre works and more working more with families and with practitioners and educators, it was just something that I wanted to be passing on to them.
Right. Let's see. You mentioned that you deal with different types of children with different sort of literacy problems, but have you known any specific impact of using helicopter stories with regard to disadvantaged children?
Absolutely. And again, in the article, I tried to pull a lot from research and around the storytelling and story acting process that started off in America. And there's a huge amount of research on, helicopter stories supporting that decontextualized language, those decontextualized language skills that narrative and fantasy play, really bring out of children, and how that then stands children, particularly children from disadvantaged backgrounds, in really good stead to move forward with their language development. But again, it's not just about, it is about individuals, but it's about that collective group within a classroom. It really does resonate with every single child, and there is story after story of children with English as additional language, children with special educational needs, being included through this process, being given a voice, and literally being given a place on the stage and a place in the community of the classroom, which again is why it's so important. We don't look at this ever as an intervention. It's just a whole encompassing way of being with young children that supports all children, no matter where they are in their development. And just before we came on the call, Trish was talking about a video that they've recently put onto their website, working with a special educational school in North Somerset. And I think the impact of that, is still, we're still finding out about it. But that was something that Trish, really focused on in North Somerset. And it's something, again, through Vivian's books, The Kindness of Children, The Boy Who Would Be a Helicopter, lots of these works, although they don't say we are talking about inclusion, because Vivian is telling the stories of children who are disadvantaged or have some additional need, although she never talks about it in those terms. She just talks to children, and children make progress with this approach, no matter where they are on that learning spectrum, because they're all learning.
Right. Most of the other questions that we were going to discuss probably would be better if they were open. But for those like myself who are new to it, how do you go about working in? How do you work and do this in a setting of the school? I know that might sound complicated, but how would you go about doing it practically?
Sorry, so was that an open question, or was that for me specifically?
That was an open question.
Yeah. An open question, sorry, Sonia, yeah.
Yes, it's an open question.
Yeah. I'll say a little bit, and then I think if Trish wants to come in, because I think there's every school, every setting incorporates this in a different way, depending on how much they manage to embrace it, depending on how much they manage to bring, for example, their leaders and managers on board with this. We're aware there are immense pressures in school on time, and some people do it every day. Some people say, oh, we do helicopter stories on a Friday, and we really say however you start it is fine. But certainly Vivian used to say a day without stories is a disconnected day, and she thinks that, in an ideal world, and certainly if I was back in the classroom, I would be trying to do some level of helicopter stories on a daily basis. Trish and I both work in schools and settings on a regular basis, but everybody sets it around their own timetable. But it's like with everything, once you, as an educator, if you feel this approach is something that is really worth embedding in your system, then you find the way. We have a number of, we have a school now who's got a nursery class, reception, and a year one class. And the teacher who's now in charge of that key phase was one of our first practitioners to take part in the helicopter stories approach as part of the Paul Hamlin project that we did. And she's moved from school to school and has taken helicopter stories with her. She now has a new head who is on board with that. They've just had a successful Ofsted, so they now feel that they've got enough professional courage to take up further, on board, and they have it, running throughout those those classes on a daily basis. So it's you take it, you learn the approach, and then you as an individual pedagogista or pedagogue or teacher or educator or practitioner, you then can use the approach and fit it into your daily basis and into your daily practice, and then grow it as you see, as you feel necessary and able to do.
Right. Trisha, I was wondering if I could ask you a question.
Okay.
What originally attracted you to this particular method?
Well, for me, someone handed me this book which is Vivian Gustin Paley's The Boy Who Would Be a Helicopter. It's actually why the approach is called Helicopter Stories. It all comes from this book. And they said to me, well, you do theatre, you might find this interesting. And because my background's theatre, not education, I'm trained in theatre and working in that way. And I read it, and the thing that really connected with me was Vivian was talking about Jason in that particular book, and Jason is the boy who didn't fit. And there was difficulties with Jason. He wouldn't tell stories, he couldn't play with the other children, he didn't connect within the classroom. And Vivian's focus was how she could help Jason to connect. And it resonated for me with my own story as the child who didn't fit in my class at school. And I didn't do very well at education, and I was always in trouble. I was the fidget. I was the kid who just couldn't sit still, couldn't keep my mouth shut, couldn't behave, couldn't listen. And the only subject that actually excited me was drama. That was the only time, particularly as I, got older and got into secondary school, that was the only thing. In primary school, any school play, I was like, I want to do this, I want to do this. It was the only thing that connected me. And as I read Vivian's work, I really felt a strong connection of going, that was me, the child who doesn't fit, the child. And, I think we've all got a bit of the child who doesn't fit within us. It's, that actually it's like, how do we find our way within a group of people? That's huge, navigating, being in a large group of people, sort of your primary school, and you go 15 people and you've just been at home. That's huge, sort of working in that way. And actually how Vivian cared and empathized with the children in her care as individuals and saw each of them and wanted to know about all of them. That was the thing that hooked me to it. And then I had to just find out more. So yeah, that was my whole initial experience of it.
Very interesting. To those of us who aren't familiar with Vivian Gustin Paley, could you tell us a little bit about her?
So she was a kindergarten teacher. She worked in the Chicago laboratory schools, which were the schools that were attached to the Chicago University. So she was in, sort of working in the kindergarten that was attached to the university, which meant that she had a real mix of children coming to that. So there'd be some people who were children of students, but there was also children from the local neighborhood. So it was a real mix of children who actually came into that setting. And Vivian describes herself as she was an ordinary teacher. She didn't really know what she was doing when she first started teaching, and she didn't feel like what she was being asked to do connected and was right, but she didn't really know what else to do. And then gradually she started to look and to find another way. And the other way was about finding the stories of the children and giving them center stage within the classroom. So all her work is about the power of play and fantasy play and how important that is and how that is the work of children. And it's interesting, Sonia, when you were saying, how does Helicopter Stories fit within the classroom? And the thing is, what Helicopter Stories does is it takes all of that richness of play, all of that richness of the tool that children use for learning, and it gives that center stage within the classroom. And for me, that's what Vivian did. And that's what the message of Vivian was how can we bring all of that? And how can we actually learn from it? Because so much of what children do in their fantasy play, with all that rich learning, we don't see as adults. It's happening and it's kind of going on. And, we might catch bits of it. But actually, with Helicopter Stories, you get to see that and you get to have all of that rich learning. And that was what Vivian was bringing in. So yeah, Vivian was an incredible woman. She was the most non-judgmental person I have ever met. and an incredible, she was my friend for 20 years. She was my mentor. I wrote to her throughout, sort of 20 years until she died in 2019. And I'll just give you a story to really sum up Vivian Gustin-Paley and how she was. Isla, who's here, hi Isla, myself and my son Callum were in Texas, Houston, and we were meeting up, and there was a big Vivian Gustin-Paley event there, and Vivian was there. Vivian had invited us to come. And I remember it really clearly. We were sat at this table. I was a single parent, so I brought my son with me. So we'd had to come into the class, and we were watching Vivian work with the children, and Callum was 9 and he got invited to join in. So she included him in the work of this kindergarten. And then when we went out for meal, this was the poshest meal, and I'm not good at posh meals. And we went out for this posh meal, and we were sat around this table, and Callum and me there, and Isla kind of, Isla helping me work out which fork I needed to use. And everyone was talking and asking about how it had gone. And everyone had been watching Vivian during the day. And then Callum went to say something, and people just talked over him. And Vivian stopped everyone. And she said, "Sorry, Callum, what was that?" And he said something about what he had got from the day. And she really listened to that, and she reflected on that, and she treated him with such respect. My son's 30 now. He still remembers how Vivian made him feel at that time. So she was just so aware of everyone, and aware of, in that situation, the 9-year-old is the one who's not heard, and she made him heard. And that for me is why I totally agree with Gail. Read Vivian's books, because it's about making everyone heard and giving everyone a voice.
Right.
Thank you, Tricia. I'm wondering if we might come back to you in a minute, and it might be a good time to bring in Alison and Catherine, who are here from Bognor Nursery School, and maybe to tell us a little bit about how the Helicopter Stories approach works in their setting and the impact you've seen. Tricia's just talked to us a lot about the kind of the passion, the fantasy, the children, and the strong narrative. And I'm just interested to know how it's worked for you guys. I know you've been doing the approach for some time now.
Yeah, so I'm head of all of Nurses in one of our experienced key workers, and we were going to talk a little bit about our journey with Helicopter Stories. Give you a little bit of context. We're in a nursery school that was established in the 40s, and we've been serving our local community for many years, and we really build our practice on the importance of relationships. And I think that's why Gustin-Paley's really resonates with us, because those relationships are so key. We're one of 4 maintained nursery schools. We've got a large setting. We have an under 3 division here. We have daycare. We have 3 and 4-year-olds who take up 3-year funding, and we have funded 2-year-olds. And about 40% of our children are English as a additional language, and we currently have 11 different languages spoken in that school. We also have a special sports. It's got children within the mainstream who have complex needs, and we're seeing increasing numbers. So Catherine's going to tell you a little bit about how we started on that journey.
So our journey began back in 2010, so we've been doing it a long time. I attended a helicopter technique workshop with Trish, and then she loved the approach. Trish came to our setting and did an inset day, which totally inspired me, because like Trish said, I'm the one that doesn't fit, kept doing the naughty things. So we just ran with it, started to run with it, and it's just embedded in our practice. And I then saw that we could become an opportunity to become a centre of excellence. So now come on, do this. So we want to make believe arts to centre of excellence, so that we can deliver training.
And one of the really important things us getting going was having that whole approach. So it was really, really embedded in everything that we did. It meant it was part of our school development plan. It was part of people's performance management. We shared it with our governing body, and we really embedded it through work through our staff meetings and reading around the subject and sharing practice with each other. So what does it look like now, Catherine?
So as we all work in different ways, but we do helicopter stories at least once a week, if not twice. But because it is such a child-centered approach and child-led approach, if a child approaches me and asks to tell a story, I will just go with that on the day and we will act out their stories on that day. Our learning environment provides a series of workshop spaces and a beautiful garden that children have access to during the session time. The children make choices about where they play and who they want to play with. The adults are based in an area for a week, and over time they move around the whole of the environment. On specific helicopter story days, key workers will have their books ready to describe children's stories. We'll invite children to tell a story. You keep inviting the children, whether they want to tell a story or whether they're ready to tell a story. We always invite children to tell stories. And as I said before, some children are so confident in the practice they will ask to tell a story, or they'll go to your book and bring it to you and say, "Can you tell a story?" We keep a list of children that have been asked or have told a story, so that we ensure that everyone is invited, whether they take up the offer or not. One story taken, they are acted out on the same day. We join up with certain groups when we got small numbers at the beginning of the school year, but by the end of the school year, we split into our own key work groups because larger numbers in order to act out the story. Obviously, as our colleagues, to ensure the number of stories that you describe is suitable and that all stories can be acted out within the time given. New staff are inducted through the YouTube link that demonstrates the approach, and I find Trish's book, Dragons, Princes and Helicopters, an invaluable tool and very accessible for new staff to read to help them support their journey.
And Catherine will often go in alongside new staff, so she'll go and demonstrate with the group, or they might go and observe her key group, so that she can give them some feedback and support into becoming skilled practitioners with the approach. And if you've got a manager or a teacher or a leadership team that you need to kind of persuade, it links to every area of the early years stage. And the quality that you get from it is just outstanding. So if you've got managers or anyone to convince, you only have to look at the early years foundation stage and you can see in every area how well it fits. And we've learnt lots over time. We did send some slides in, but we're not sure how we should share those. But we've got some slides of the different stories that we've discovered over time. So I'll just talk you through them without the visuals. But we describe lots of different stories over the years, and we know that there are lots of different types of stories that our children tell. We know how important repetition is in young children's learning, how it develops their competency and their confidence in acquiring a range of skills, including language. So often we see children doing their stories that involve repetition, often when they're at the beginning of their storytelling journey, or as they develop their English if they're a child with EAL. We've also noticed that often children might tell a story list, which may be, thank you. So here you can see some examples of these were both children with English as additional language who were telling very repetitive stories. And these are a couple of examples of some children who were telling a list form of stories. So Schulte on the left there, he's talking, a list of things that were happening for him, and that was his form of a story. And as children start to see the adult committing their words as paper, it gives them that impetus to keep telling the story and developing it over time. So those lists become more complex. And one of the things that's really fantastic about helicopter stories is that as you're scribing over the school year, or for us, we have children sometimes for 5 terms, that sample of their language development and their communication skills shows such a clear development of their progression, the vocabulary they're learning, the way they're putting a story together. It tells you so much about the child and their abilities.
Yeah, we've noticed over time, obviously, as Alison said, that the stories develop. So on the next slide, it's one of my children, Ryan. He started with a story based on a familiar song. And then over 5 months, his story progressed to include other influences from his own experience, such as Transformers and Power Rangers. His storytelling became more complex, including a greater variety of characters engaging in action. And as Alison said, it just shows the child's current interests. I really use helicopter stories to inform my record keeping, because if I notice the mathematical language they might be using, positional language they might be using, and also when it comes to acting them out, it's really interesting to see their creativity up there on the and their confidence and self-esteem. It's amazing. And we have had some very confident authors. When you think we are working with 3 and 4-year-olds, on the next slide, this is an example of one child's story. The language that he used was absolutely amazing, and he loved nature and animals, and he was identified as gifted and talented for understanding the world. And he also started to tell stories at home, and his mum brought them in to share with his key worker.
And on the next slide, you'll see another example. This is a child I had. She was an avid storyteller. She'd often come in and want to tell a story. And one day she arrived beaming and she said, "Look what Mummy did." And she was so proud that Mum had written her story down at home. And of course, we had to act it out at group time. And that homeschool link is really important. And when we're sharing records with parents, often we're talking about the stories, and parents are either gobsmacked at some of the content or it causes hilarity, but often they're just very proud to see how their children are developing in their confidence as a storyteller, as an actor, in their expression. And you'll see on the next slide some of the feedback we've had from parents. So sharing journals, the child had lots to say about the pictures, and he read his stories to them. And you know, the parents are really appreciative of the opportunities that this gives to the children in terms of their development and their learning. And plus, it's great fun. You know, it's a great privilege for us as practitioners to do it. You know, it gives us so much for the child and their learning and the development and the way that we're supporting them. But as a practitioner, when a lot of the joy has been sucked out of education by the endless initiatives, to have this joyful thing, it is just a pleasure, to be honest. So not only does it have great resonance for the children in terms of articulating their play and their thoughts and their ideas, for practitioners, it just gives you back that sense of, it feeds your soul, really.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate that. It just reminds you of why you're doing what you're doing, and it's just a joy. And it's such a lovely shared experience with children and adults. It's fantastic. We love it. If we go on to the next slide, we notice themes and influences. How I know Vivian Gustin-Paley talks a lot about this, about how other children's stories influence their friends, and it's really interesting to watch them, how they're paying attention to their friends and what they're saying. So these 2 boys used to play together and would sit together when they were having their stories scribed. So they'd borrow ideas from one another, and this was their play as well as, you know, their stories. So it was superheroes. They loved their superhero play and stories. We also find on the next slide how it's a tool for children to manage their feelings and emotions. So Oliver explored a wide variety of themes, and emotions often featured strongly in his stories. They included characters who got annoyed, forgot things, went to hospital, ran away and got hurt. And children often use their play and in turn their stories to make sense of the world. And our focus this year, our school target is in introducing mindfulness. And we're very interested to see whether the work we're doing with that will have any impact on the stories that the children tell and within their story acting as well.
So we touched earlier on the fact that it's a great tool for all of our children, including children with English as an additional need. And you'll see on the next slide how children are really motivated to participate in the storytelling and acting, and they gain confidence in trying out their spoken English as we're scribing the words. They hear their words repeated back as we write the story. They have the opportunity to hear stories told by their peers, and they start to develop their own vocabulary. And their understanding is supported through the way their friends might model actions as they act out their stories together. But also we get lots of wow moments, and Catherine's going to tell you a little bit about some wow moments she's had.
Yeah, and again, this feeds back to the fantastic and amazing children that we work with every day. Just this last, I continue, we've done it for so long, but still things happen that continue to surprise me and amaze me, and it's fantastic. So even just this week, one of our children who's been here a little while, she went to another key adult, and she asked her, will you tell me a story? And she's been through the process of sort of scribing, but as her adult told the story, she drew the story. So it was a sunny day and they went to the zoo, and she just drew this picture that encompassed the whole of the adult story. And that's not something that I'd come across before within our setting. So that was one wow moment. And I think it is like, we had a child who was in our SSC. He'd been at nursery for 10 months and had never wanted to tell a story ever. We were just sat out in the garden one day and I offered him the opportunity, would you like to tell a story? He just went, yep. He also had English was his second language. He thought long and hard, and initially I couldn't understand the very first words he was saying, but then he began with the words a white horse. I clarified that this was the beginning of his story, and he nodded, and then began a list type story which was directly linked to his favourite story in one of our core books, Brown Bear, What Do You See? And it really was a wow moment. He chose to be the title character in his story when we acted it out. And the number of roles in his story meant that a lot of his peers were involved, and it was lovely feeding back to his parents that significant step.
So moving on to the next slide and the one after that. So we
sorry, got carried away with the wow moments.
So as I mentioned, we have a special support centre here. We have children with additional needs, and the children are fully integrated and supported with their environment, and we're all often reflecting on how we engage the children with the helicopter stories. So at the beginning, it was often involving them on the stage. Sometimes that was a little impromptu, but it doesn't matter. But they were very keen to join in with the acting, and over time we were sort of reflecting on how we actually scribe for some of those children and kind of developing our approach. We were very, very impressed by the work of Dyecourt School, which is another centre of excellence where they've done a lot of work with some very profoundly disabled children. And we have scribed for our children as well here. So Jan was a Polish child who was in our special support centre. He was so excited when I wrote his name at the top of the page. And then he started with the la, 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 which I scribed. Another example was Vanessa. Again, she had EAL. She was a child attending our special support centre. Again, very, very excited to see her name written on the page. And she put her hand to her cheek, and then it was me, 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 and her hand to her cheek. And just the power of, you know, being heard, being seen. So we're often reflecting on how we do communicate with those children, make sure they're seen, make sure they're heard, and make sure they have their part in it, because every child is very important. And again, this is why the approach really resonates with us as a setting, because that is exactly what Vivian Gustin-Paley was teaching us through her work. And, you know, we're trying to emulate that with our children here. And it's always a work in progress because children are all very different, their needs are different, and increasingly we're having more children with additional needs, and we're constantly thinking about how we support them. And this is another really useful tool in our toolkit in doing so. The other thing that's very powerful, which Catherine's touched on a little bit, is how powerful it is for children to become writers themselves. So on the next slide, you'll see children who are engaged in meaningful writing. They see us scribe, and then they want to take that role, and they see themselves as a writer. And that is very, very powerful. And usually over the year, we see that increasingly with our children. They become such confident writers themselves. And then more recently, we've become very interested, not just in the storying aspect, because it's very easy to look at the language development, but we've been thinking very much about the physicality and the acting on the stage. So Catherine, do you want to say just a little bit about that?
Well, just that. It's really exciting to see how a child interprets a role. And that's why Trish has always taught us, and Isla, you sit on your hands so you're not influencing them at all. So yeah, do listen sometimes. And it's just fantastic to see that. And I know my colleagues and I've really been trying to show this through our record keeping process. Just again, the confidence to just even get up onto that stage for some children is a momentous step. And it's just so interesting to see how they interpret their roles.
So if you look at the next slide, you'll see how children are gaining lots of skills in their performance. And then moving on to the next slide, you can see that we're thinking about how they communicate expressively, how they fill the space, how they begin to understand themselves, and developing things like proprioception, understanding where they are in the world. On the next slide, you'll see how it also gives an opportunity to be influential, to learn how to communicate with others, that eye contact is really important.
And some become very competent directors. It's really fascinating. They know exactly how they want their story to be acted out, so they will tell their peers in no uncertain terms.
Moving on to the next slide, you can see how they become curious and interested in each other, whether they're acting or whether they're in the audience. It's that mutual appreciation for what everybody's contributing.
And on the next slide, it's so lovely for that they're working together for a common goal. They've got the opportunity to take on the role as director, like I say. They draw on ideas and knowledge of the group to share ideas and make decisions how to portray different elements of the story. In embedding helicopter stories as an important part of our practice, we've learnt so much from the children. It constantly evolves as new children join us, and our journey continues.
And then just to round off, so what do the team think? So some of the team love it and get it straight away. Others might have a few reservations initially, but often once they start engaging in the process with their key children, they understand how beneficial it is for the children on so many levels. And of course, as we said, it's fun and enjoyable. It's really a no-brainer. So if you're not doing it, read Trish's book, have a go. It's really simple, but it will give you back so much for your children.
So, ladies, thank you so much. That's really amazing, and you're so passionate in the way that you talk, and just watching your presentation and your photos and what the children had shared, it absolutely reminded me of reading Trish's book, Princesses, Dragons and Helicopter Stories, and both of those experiences I found profoundly moving. Trish's book, I laughed and I cried, kind of alternately all the way through, just because of the power, and similarly, when you're showing, the child that kind of just me is the story. I just think that it's an amazing approach. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Tricia, we'll come back to you in a minute, but we did promise time for questions, and I just wonder if anybody out there might have some questions that they'd like to ask really about any of the panel members. I know we're not blessed with much time left, and we will make sure to come back to Tricia at the end. But I wonder if anybody there does have any questions that are burning that you would like to ask. Perhaps if that's the case, you could pop them in the chat, and then we'll be able to pass them on to direct them to the people who are here with us. Whilst we're waiting to see if anybody's got any questions, Tricia, is there anything? I mean, you've had Gail's talks about the approach, and Alison and Catherine. Anything that you kind of feel you particularly wanted to add to anything that they've said?
I mean, wow. I feel really moved. It's so nice hearing, you know, sort of with Gail, we've worked with really closely in terms of North Somerset. With Alison and Catherine, we've worked with really closely through our Helicopter Stories champion. So, you know, and hearing the long-lasting impact, Vivian would be smiling. You know, I mean, I really feel that. So I'm really moved. I feel, honored to hear that this work is so important. I cannot stress how important it is, how much it benefits all children. And I think that, you know, that notion of all children, if I said there is an approach we have that will benefit every single child, you know, it's not something that some children are going to switch off from or whatever. Every child finds their own way into this. And Gail was mentioning about SEN children, and I'm just going to put into the chat a link which is to our website, because we have put an 8-minute film on there about a special school we were working with in North Somerset as part of the work we were doing with Gail and her team. And it's just incredible, West Haven School, and seeing how they were involving. And there's footage in the film of the approach working with a boy who is non-verbal. And the way the team there, Natalie, worked with him using cards and getting him to point out and tell his story was just amazing. And one of the things for me that was really powerful that Natalie was talking about when we interviewed her was how he knows story, and you can see, even though he's non-verbal, the images that he's pointing at, they form a loose narrative. What is happening is a loose narrative. And that's because we are born understanding story. It's intrinsic. It's why children are engaged in fantasy play. It's what all of those things are. And actually, you know, that is so important, that if we make that a valuable part of our curriculum, we're really tapping into something. Our children come to our settings equipped with all of this. So we're actually helping them along that way and helping to support that to develop. And it's really, you know, sort of thinking about what Alison and Catherine were saying in terms of, you know, where it links. And Isla and I, we launch a podcast tomorrow called Growing Storytellers, a little bit of a push there, but you'll be able to get it on Apple and Spotify and wherever you get podcasts. It is there apparently, and also on YouTube if you want to watch us talking. But we started and we wanted to go through what is the first framework for the first 10, and we went, okay, we're going to be looking at the EYFS framework and see how Helicopter Stories links. And it links to so many things. It really does. It's, you know, as an approach that's kind of connecting in terms of speaking and language development, in terms of personal, social, emotional development, in terms of looking at turn taking, in terms of more literacy based things, seeing the connection between the spoken and the written word. It connects on so many levels. And, you know, sort of for me and Isla, as we began looking at and planning out the podcast and the first 10 sessions, it became, all the time we're going, God, there's another connection. There is something that's happening there. And of course it is. because play is the work of children. Children are equipped because of play. And that's what this approach does, is it enables them to use all of those skills that they have and use that as the foundation of their learning. And I've got a story I do want to tell. I'm bursting to tell because this will be the first airing this story has had, because it only happened to me this morning. But it was one of those examples of the power of this approach. And I'm working in a nursery at the moment, and today I was in there, and there's a girl who 3 years old. It was her first day today, and she was doing brilliantly. And we came and sat round the stage to act out stories. And she asked if she could tell a story. She put her hand up and said, I want to. Okay, so I got my paper out and I put her name, Kezzy, on the top of the page, and I looked at her. And she suddenly, the horror in her face, because I think she just went, oh, I've got to say something. And I could see it immediately. So I just turned and said, what character might you be in your story? And she just went, nothing. And she started to crawl towards the stage. And I said, do you just want to walk around the stage? And she got up and she started to walk. And I just narrated what she was doing. I said, a girl walking around. And another girl, a 4-year-old who'd been with me, from last year, got up and joined her on the stage. And I just, 2 girls walking around the stage. And it was just brilliant. And it's the first time I've had a story where my page is completely empty. There is no words, but it made me go, nothing can be a story, because actually it was a story. It was a story about a girl taking to the stage for the first time and taking a risk and being brave. And it was a story about another girl having solidarity with her and supporting her in that. And it was a story about, actually you have picture books without words, and this was an acting out without words, and it was just brilliant. There was and all the other children were really watching, and it felt so powerful. And I think that's it. This approach, nothing a child does is wrong in Helicopter Stories. There is nothing they can do that is wrong, because actually what we're doing is we're seeing the offers they're making and we're accepting them, and we're seeing where they go. And trust the child, trust the child, trust the child. That's what this approach is all about. So yeah, watch our podcast or listen.
Fantastic. That's all very, very exciting. And what a great story, because I think that had flashed into my mind at one point as well, that kind of, what do you do, having read the book, and what do you do if there's really nothing? But of course there's never nothing. So so what an amazing anecdote to share, and exciting that we were the first to hear it. So thank you so much. I think, Tricia, you've got a slide that you'd like to share, because I think we were thinking that from this, people might be thinking, right, where can I find out about Helicopter Stories? What might I do next? So this seems like a good time to share that slide, I think. Is that okay? Is that Becky that's got it?
Yeah, Becky's got the slide.
Becky's got the slide. Okay,
Becky,
lovely, fantastic. So which is really great. So that will kind of, and that will show people where they can go, the kinds of things they can do to get involved.
Yeah. I mean, we have online training. So we have Helicopter Stories on Demand,
yes,
which is pre-recorded. So people can, get access to that. Reading my book. My book is a how-to. So, and I know a lot of people have just started with reading the book, and that's, and they've actually gone on to do the approach. For me, Helicopter Stories on Demand is even more detailed and, sort of goes into a lot. I do actually have a second book as well, which is called The Growth of a Storyteller.
yes.
Which isn't a how-to, but for me it's a why. It's all the reasons why we do this, and and it's following children from age 2 to 7 and their journey. So there's children I've been tracking and anecdotes on there too. But yeah,
amazing. Thank you so much. I've just had a message from Becky to say she's so sorry, but Zoom has, well, you can see it's frozen her.
It was a good slide though, but I did it anyway.
Oh, we will send the slide out if that's all right, Tricia, so that everybody's got it and you know can access it. It showed, I have seen it briefly. It just showed the kind of things that are available for people to follow up. Is that right?
Yeah, but have a look at the SEN film because it's but bring a tissue because it's actually very moving.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's all very moving. I think it's all very moving, and it really is what matters, isn't it? I have to say, I was doing a session with some initial teacher education students today, and I don't know them very well. There are year ones, the undergraduate program, and we got to a bit, we didn't do helicopter stories, but we did a bit where we looked at storytelling, and I had been a bit nervous because I thought, what will I do with this group of adults who look quite serious? And they absolutely loved it and came to life, and you know, and just were just so passionate about it. And I think, yeah, obviously, you know, this approach that we're talking about is kind of, you know, really for children developing their language and literacy. But I think the passion for story just never leaves us, you know, and the fun and the power that it has, I think, was as evident to me in a class full of 18+-year-olds, just as it is, as you say, from kind of 2 years upwards. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate Gail and Tricia and Alison and Catherine giving up their time. Fantastic. So thank you so much. Thank you those people who've joined in. It's really been lovely to hear you, and I can see some lovely thanks messages coming up for our speakers there as well. So thank you, people. We will leave it there if that's all right. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at another EA event in the future. We'll make sure that you get the slides sent out to you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.